Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of
the Super Data Brothers.
That's right. I'm Ryan.
I'm Eric.
And we are your weekly show about all things data and analytics. We have an awesome one queued up for you today. I'm super excited to be talking to our guests. But before we get started, one point of order. This is a live stream. And what that means is that it's a lot more fun for you and for us if you get your reactions and questions into the chat. We will handle them as they come up. And our guests today, I think, would love to field whatever you have to say, especially get your reactions in there because this is going to be a spicy one today. So while we're getting rolling, let us know where you are watching from so we can give you a shout out. All right. So today's topic is all about the deep dive into the dark underbelly of the data startup world. We have, of course, the world famous tech bros joining us to unpack what is going on in startup land and with all the beautiful people who bring us all of our beautiful data products. And so expect sparks to fly today. In fact, in that vein, Eric, why don't you hit us with a meme of the week?
All right, here we go.
Get out, get out! Okay, but on my way, I'm gonna be doing this. If you get hit, it's your own fault.
Okay, then I'm gonna start kicking air like this. And if any part of you should feel that air, it's your own fault.
I better go check that out.
All right. So real quick before we bring the Tech Bros on, a quick plug. Today's live streaming sponsor is who, Eric?
Us, the Super Data Brothers.
Us, that's right, the Super Data Brothers. So if you're looking to build a fantastic analytics front end that has an impact, shows ROI, and makes your users happy, reach out to us, and we are happy to help. You can get a hold of us here. That's me, by the way. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and bring the Tech Bros on. Mary McCarthy and Lauren Ballack. Welcome.
Hey, bros.
What's going on?
Awesome to have you today. Could you just give us maybe a quick intro to who you two are, and then we'll dive in.
Absolutely. So Mary McCarthy, co-host of the, as you said, world famous Tech Bros show that Lauren and I live stream every Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. New York time. We talk about everything and sometimes nothing happening in the tech world, and with the specific focus on both of our area of specialty, which is really crossover with yours, which is data, and then even more specifically, the modern data stack. And we'll get into a little bit later on kind of what motivated us to start the show, but we're having tons of fun with it. Mostly love hearing from viewers, getting their feedback, and super excited to be here. Can I start with a little trivia about Mario Brothers, by the way?
Yeah.
Sure.
This is the only thing I know about video games. Does anyone know, you guys probably do know, or Lauren might know, the last name of Mario and Luigi?
Is it Mario?
It is Mario. Does everybody know that? I just learned that recently. Does everybody know that
it's Mario? Wait, is it Luigi?
Mario.
Luigi? Is it Luigi Mario?
Yeah.
I think so.
It's Mario, and Luigi Mario.
Luigi Mario.
I mean, talk about getting the short end of the stick as a younger brother. Your last name is your older brother's first name.
Right. Wait, which of the two are you, the younger brother?
Can you guess?
I think it's you.
It's me?
I would have said Eric.
Eric
Yeah.
is the younger brother.
I guess I just look
Eric's-
more distinguished.
You got the longer hair, and Ryan's
Or
got
twins.
the-
Maybe they're twins.
And all the hair's in the power. All the power's in the hair. So
Yeah.
it makes
Yeah,
sense.
right.
No, I'm the older brother. I'm older than Eric by about 7 years. Yeah, and then there's a sister in between us who is not. She's a nurse. She's not in the data world.
She's doing a real job.
She is doing a real job. I feel that way sometimes when she's talking about like what she does. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like actually helping people.
And, probably knows a lot about data, right? Like, job like that, you're tracking stuff all day long. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Lauren, so what's your story? What do you do?
Yeah, I run a company called Upright Analytics. We do consulting both for companies that sell data products, as well as customers who maybe have gotten a little bit ahead of their skis. And I like to call it pulp fiction work. In the movie Pulp Fiction, John Travolta. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but I think everyone's seen Pulp Fiction by now, 1994 or something. But he accidentally, kills somebody, and it sets off this big mess. And Samuel L. Jackson, they got to go to this guy's house. They got to like run around and clean up this gigantic mess that they've made before they get caught. Who do they call? They call him the Wolf, right? They call the gangster, and the gangster's like, "Hang on, I'm getting the Wolf on the line." So I do a lot of the Wolf work. Companies, overinvest in data stuff, or they go off the wrong path. They buy the wrong stuff. They hire the wrong people. And so I come in and kind of, make it nice. And I've been doing that for a couple of years, and it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. A quick shout out to Rob in the chat. Good to see you, Rob. So fun fact, I was actually a theater and playwriting major, and Rob, who was a theater and playwriting major at university with me and now also works in the tech world, has joined us today. So good to see you, man. All right. So speaking of messes, fortuitous week maybe to have you two on the show. What the hell happened over the weekend with Silicon Valley Bank? Can you help us unpack this for those who maybe aren't aware of how the startup ecosystem works and Silicon Valley Bank's role in that ecosystem?
Yeah. Do you want in my opinion, what happened is the Ponzi scheme almost collapsed, right? And so, if people don't know, Silicon Valley Bank is a bank where I've seen the number quoted at a 50% a number of times, but half the startups in America have their money at Silicon Valley Bank, and Silicon Valley Bank is a bank. They take positions and investments. They made a number of investments that had some kind of questionable duration risk, which meant that they basically bought these investments and had to sell them at a loss. That triggered a lot of people to look into what this bank's actually doing. The bank is not well diversified among who their depositors are. Of the people who bank at Silicon Valley, most of it is like the Napa wine industry, various people who work in tech in San Francisco, tech companies which tend to be in the Bay Area. So it's kind of like, when the auto industry collapsed in Detroit, right? And we're talking to two Michigan guys here, everything's connected, and people lose their jobs and they don't go to the bank, and the grocery stores close because people move out, and et cetera, et cetera. This all happened at once. And what happened is that everyone rushed to get their money out. The FDIC, up until this point, only insures deposits up to $250,000. So if you were stuck in this as the bank collapsed, and you had more than $250,000 in the bank, which most of these companies do, they're funded VC tech companies. Your money was not available, and if you had a payroll due or vendors to pay this upcoming week, and it was going to be more than $250,000, you were kind of screwed. So the government Treasury and FDIC have, basically raised the limit. Now there's like deposits are insured. Who knows how high it'll go? Up to infinity.
Right.
You can just print more money. So that's the long and short of it. And I think a lot of the obnoxious stuff I saw over the weekend is a bunch of VC people who are frankly just scrambling around, running around. Like they benefited very much from Silicon Valley Bank over the years, to the point where getting favorable, if they bring enough business to the bank and they've got a banker there that they know, they can get a good mortgage rate on their house. And, it's very much this inbreeding, right? Like the whole problem is inbreeding. And if everybody is in the same ecosystem and the bank collapses, then all of a sudden the ecosystem goes away. And a lot of these tech companies too sell, like their customer base is also startups, which also bank at Silicon Valley. So if your customers, default and they can't pay you, you're not going to collect any money. And then the whole thing kind of just collapses pretty quickly. So, there's not even really a left wing or a right wing thing that's happening with the government bailing this out. It's more of a, libertarian versus like socialist or populist thing that's going on. And you see factions in both, U.S. political parties supporting or going against this. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm pretty interested to see what happens next.
Yeah, I was talking to a startup founder of a BI company, and he was telling me that he had two VCs basically insist that he keep all his deposits at Silicon Valley Bank, but he didn't. He kept them at like just a boring old-fashioned bank, and so he's been okay through this process. But like it just struck me, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about this, but just this, like, did nobody ever step back and think like, oh, like we all do our checking at the same financial institution? Like maybe this is a problem?
Well, there's not a lot of thinking happening around a lot of it, right? Like one of the things we've tried to, I don't mean to plug our show, by the way, in every answer, but I might
plug
end up
away.
doing
Your
that.
show's awesome.
Just because like these are the things that we've been talking about since we started in January. And, it's really Lauren who's been talking about it for well over a year in her blog. Also a plug for Lauren's blog, but, calling out the mentalities and structures behind the venture capital system. And then now a lot more is being exposed. And one of the things that's been just fascinating over the past few days and really since Friday is the practices of venture capital really coming into under broad scrutiny. Now, whether or not there's any fruitful discussions of that happening yet. A month ago, we were like two crazies talking about that on our show, like, haha, let's look at like where venture capital money comes from, but nobody's really doing this. And now a month later, the tides have shifted, which is, I think, pretty incredible. In the big picture, I think no one doubted that the government would step in by Sunday night and stop the contagion. So like any potential chaos has been reined in. But I think it's great that these discussions are happening now of how no, as you said, Ryan, people aren't talking about this stuff, and we need to be.
Yeah,
the people who claim to be, the most savvy intellectually, boasting about how we're changing the world with our technology. Well, you also have to have some, financial savvy along with that, especially the ones who are being handed tens of millions of dollars to go play around with.
Yeah. Yeah. It really was surprising to me. And it really gets back to that ethos of the whole startup scene in the Valley is like, we're the smartest people there are, right? Like we have it all figured out. And there's this thing, when I look at many of the biggest tech companies that have come out, in the last decade, it seems like a lot of it is about, well, we're going to actually do something that people have been doing forever. We're just going to shift it onto an app, right? We're going to take taxis. We're going to shift it onto an app. We're going to take dating. We're going to shift it onto an app. So like, what did they actually create versus just changing where the money flows? And I feel like in the data space is a lot of that too. If you look at these modern data stack tools, a lot of them, you can argue, yeah, they do something, they do ETL better than Informatica, right? But did they like invent a fundamentally new thing that hasn't been done before? Or is it that, they just came up with a slightly better way to do it? They got some venture funding, 100 of them came up with a slightly better way to do it. Or they created a new category, like I've heard you two talk about reverse ETL before, which is what exactly? How is it different from ETL? But, just like where do you think this ethos comes from, or this groupthink comes from? What is it that's driving it? Like, why wasn't somebody asking this sort of question?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things behind this venture model and how it works. And I have venture capital and private equity customers of mine. Like, firms will pay me to do various due diligence and things. I angel invest. I know who I like and who I don't like in this group. I think most people want to do a good job in life. Like, you give them a job. Anybody from the CEO down to like the junior first year analyst, most people want to do a good job at their job most of the time, right? And so and the same is true of venture capital. Like, I mean, for all, the nonsense that the industry causes, I do think most people want to do a good job at their thing. And what that means is that, like, you have to invest with momentum. And the way like these funds are 10 years usually. Like, it's 10 years that the fund lasts. So funds that are, in this like current vintage now of 2023, which there aren't many because the funding's drying up, but like they're going to exist unless something happens or, they restructure it. It's going to exist until 2033. And the funds from 2012 are, just completed last year. And what, like you have to look at where the money comes from too. Like, the money comes from pension funds. The money comes from, university endowments, hospital endowments, like, large trusts, what's called family offices. So that's basically, wealthy people who, have enough money that, they basically set up an investment shop. And that's where the money comes from. And venture capital is the riskiest and like the toy asset class of where these folks put their money. Like, they'll put their money in the stocks and bonds. They'll put their money into, hedge funds. They'll put their money into, private equity firms, real estate, whatever. And then the riskiest is venture capital. And like, with interest rates so low over the last, 10 years, and then QE coming out of the last, global financial crisis, that kind of, spurred all this technology investment. A lot of money has flowed into VC, and because so much money has flowed in, because money's been cheap and we're just printing more of it, these institutional investors who give money to the VCs to invest on their behalf, like, the hose has just been going. And the VCs, like, they get paid two different ways, right? Like, the same with a hedge fund, the same with like, a lot of other money managers. You get fees, it's usually 2% per year. And then you get, carry, which is, a cut of the profits if you invest in the next Facebook or the next whatever. If it works, you get, it's typically 20%. And what's happened in the last couple of years is that everyone's forgotten about that 20, and these venture capital funds just want to keep raising these firms want to raise new funds. So they get, fund one, and then on paper, it looks like they've like, made 50% off of all their companies because other VC firms have come in and said, oh, they're worth this much. They're worth even more, blah, blah, blah. And so it just makes this cycle of nonsense. And that's why we see so many companies out there, especially in infra, B2B, SaaS, things like that, that seem, to your point, Ryan, kind of redundant. So there's a lot of incentives going along here, but I don't want to ramble on. I'll take a pause there.
No, that was good. And so there's that kind of, like, you think about what we call the modern data stack. Like, is that really, what drove the development of this idea that we're going to have, so I started in kind of analytics in 2009. And back then you basically bought, at least at the firms I was working at, which were, pretty large firms. you went to these huge vendors and you bought a tool that did like everything. Like you bought Cognos or Business Objects for BI, and it did your semantic layer. It had its security model. It did observability. It did reporting. It did dashboarding. It did self-service. It did all of that stuff in one big box, right? You look at the modern data stack, and seems like you decompose whatever those big platforms were into each individual little piece. And then we're going to install all of those pieces I just mentioned and try to cobble them together to do BI. And I guess the theory is, well, we can take the best in breed, right? We'll take the best observability. We'll take the best dashboarding tool. Like what do you think drove this development of, you know what, we're going to actually have a point solution startup for every little thing we're going to do in the data stack? Oh, Mary, you're muted.
Mary, you're unmuted if you want to go.
You're describing a situation where it's a bunch of companies, maybe a certain percent of it, which are features, and do features need to be companies? And it's, to a certain degree, I'd say it's that hubris when the money's available, which again, I only understand the venture capital market thanks to Lauren's terrific explainers. But if the money's available, start your company because you want to launch your company, and then you have all these, products out there that, maybe they work, but long-term feasibility of having them as their standalone companies, is that needed? It doesn't seem like it. And I think we're going to see over the next 24 to 48 months where we have this explosion, we're going to see a lot of those shut down, with obviously things have been spooked now by what happened with SVP. But I think regardless, as money gets more expensive, as the interest rates hike, we're going to see a lot of these companies shut down. I'm not calling out any company in particular or making any predictions, but it's just natural. The market is oversaturated in the modern data stack. How many again, reverse ETL, data observability, data catalog companies can the market support?
Right.
Yeah. And to get to the reason of why this happens, people like to invest in ecosystems, or they like to invest in I usually call it a hub and the satellites. So in the e-commerce world, we saw this with Shopify. When Shopify started to get big, anybody could start, making a Shopify store. And Shopify was just the platform, right? They have order management, and, their feature set has grown over time, but they were the baseline, the basics, right? Same with Salesforce, similar thing. You buy the base, you start using it, then you buy the apps along the way. Same with Snowflake, right? You use Snowflake, you start moving some data around, blah, blah, blah. Then you start, building up the apps around it. Same with the mobile ecosystem. Back in 2012, 2011 or so, back when everybody and their mother was making an app for this, an app for that, mobile's the new platform. So it's the idea of this, there's always this platform that comes out, whether it's mobile, whether it's Shopify, whether it's Salesforce, whether it's Snowflake, and then a bunch, because they just want to provide the platform and they don't want to take the risk on putting out new features and selling extra things within their platform. They keep it light and they let the ecosystem take over. And that's what we see here with all this stuff is based around Snowflake. You don't have to use Snowflake. You can use, Google BigQuery or Redshift or any of the others out there that are equivalent, but it's all based around Snowflake because, when Snowflake went public in 2020, that is when all of the funding to stuff that drives more compute to Snowflake really took off.
Yeah.
And one of the big incentives around this is, I don't want to call it round tripping because that has a lot of negative connotations and sounds bad, but what I'm talking about here is there are some very large investors who own billions of dollars in Snowflake and still do to this day, like Sequoia, Altimeter, a bunch of others. A bunch of VCs own public stocks now because they're investing in public stocks more and more. So a lot of people own a lot of Snowflake, either as individuals or through their firms. And I'm talking about 10% of Snowflake, or more than 10% of Snowflake. So a couple $1 billion in market cap is owned by some of these VC firms. So if they can go and then invest in companies that drive more compute and make, Snowflake collect more revenue, like you're like, oh, why did they invest $20 million into this dumb thing over here? Well, it's because they get their money back when the revenue goes up, or their money's liquid at Snowflake, and they can sell the stock by making the revenue go up, or by at least delaying the revenue multiple of Snowflake. They can actually sell stock where it's liquid in Snowflake, and who cares about their other investments? Like, I don't know how they have their, I've looked it all up and I've got it all mapped out, but they have got you could smoke certain funds if you want, invest in a bunch of nonsense, but you pay back the funds that you care about with Snowflake because it drives compute consumption back. And so that's kind of like the whole, investing in a supply chain, right? And Snowflake's very obvious. Like you could argue, well, you could do this with Google, you could do this with Amazon, but those are much broader businesses. Like the Google's data and analytics suite, which is everything around Spanner and BigQuery and Bigtable and everything like that. You're not going to see the same. Google search business is orders of magnitude more important. You're not actually going to see the money come back. The same with Amazon, right? They have AWS. Yeah, the money can come back to Redshift. The money can come back to EC2. The money can come back to wherever over AWS, but that's not going to be reflected in the stock. But at Snowflake, it is reflected in the stock because that's the only thing Snowflake does, right? And so that's why you see it. That's why you see all these VCs go crazy. And I was at the Snowflake conference last year, and it's just a bunch of, it was very entertaining to watch everything play out.
I can just imagine, I just imagine you sitting there and seeing all the invisible connections that everybody else isn't seeing, right? It's like one of those scenes in a movie where it's like Lauren can read the code that's just going down the screen during the keynote or something like that.
Well, it was in Vegas, so yeah, it's there's 21 guys who did the MIT blackjack thing. If you ever saw that movie,
yeah,
just running the numbers in their head,
right? That's hilarious. Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that too, because strictly in the BI space where Eric and I do most of our stuff, I talk to there's this idea I've seen this happen a lot over the last few years where people think that they'll be looking at their BI platforms and they'll make the decision to move to Power BI. And one of the driving forces behind that is the perception that Power BI is basically free, because you look at the licensing, the per user license, and it's very expensive. And I always say to people well, look, Microsoft is going to make their money, right? So what is Power BI's purpose? And it's to drive compute to Azure. That's right. Power BI's purpose, So right. Yes, whatever platform you may have today that you're paying, say you're a large company, you're paying, $1 million a year for some very large legacy BI platform. And you look at how much you're going to pay Microsoft, and the amount on the bill that's going to say Power BI will be lower, but the bill itself will be higher because that's the purpose. And you hear it with Snowflake too. People move from some legacy system to Snowflake, and part of the motivation that I see is they think that Snowflake is going to cost less money. And I say, it might in year one, but what is going to happen over time, you might be surprised.
Right.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If I'm someone who's just working in the data field right now, and I loved your article, Lauren, about middleware jobs that I read. Was fascinating. If I'm someone who's working in the data space right now, and I've developed expertise in these modern data stack tools, and I'm working in a startup or kind of a tech adjacent firm that is using these tools, how do you think those people should be thinking about what's happening right now and the changes that are coming in the next few years? And how do you prepare as someone who's not a VC and, doesn't work at DBT, but maybe has expertise in DBT and their job right now is based on that expertise. Like, what should you be doing, or how should you be thinking?
Let me give you the perspective of someone who came into the industry 2 years ago into data, and into the modern data stack. Really, it's about my modern data stack anniversary. I'm about 12 months in, had to learn fast to be a solid data practitioner, and you all would know more about this than I do. Stick as close as possible to all the basics, deepen your knowledge of all the basics, tool agnostic. It's what, the real pros say. That's what Joe Reese says from the beginning to the end of his data engineering book. It's not about XYZ tool. It's about understanding data on the one hand, and then understanding how to apply it in business. New college grads, boot camp grads, and all that. I don't think there is much down the getting distracted by, I'm going to only specialize in a certain tool, but they aren't getting that side of really learning how to apply things in business. They're learning things like how to build a machine learning algorithm, and then you go into a company and you don't know, basic SQL and how to count customers. So whatever happens in the modern data stack over the coming years, I would say for anyone, it's sticking to the basics of data. What most people go into data for, because they like that, right? And then deepening your knowledge of your business and of the stuff that we're talking about, the ecosystem that you're in, right?
Yeah, I think when I started working in this stuff a decade ago, like, data was fun. I don't think it's fun anymore. Maybe I'm just jaded. But like, there's too many.
That's why we have to do shows to bring some fun into it.
That's right.
Yeah. Light it up a bit.
Right. The fun of figuring out, analyses and putting analyses together is what I was doing, when I started doing this. And it was very much like companies wouldn't pay, at least in my experience back then, they wouldn't really pay for just dashboard churning out. And at some point in 2014, 2015, 2016, I don't know, everything just became churning out dashboards. It became too easy to make a dashboard or something. And so the idea of what an analyst is, or even a data scientist, if you want to use that term, the idea of what that is just became churning out dashboards. And then because you had to make more dashboards, right? And then you have to model your data more. And so then, you see, DBT and other stuff come along, especially around this tech startup world. And it's just this dashboard churning, and none of it's very valuable. And what happens is that, what I would recommend to people is, you have to, if you're a year or two in, you got to realize that just churning out dashboards is not really a sustainable job long term. Your company is going to divest in that at some point, because it's going to hit a point of ridiculousness where there's 2,500 dashboards, but people only use 10 of them. And then behind it, you've got, 500 DAGs running using Snowflake compute or whatever. So you're just paying, your company's paying 3 different ways. You're paying for the products, they're paying for you, and they're paying for cloud costs and cloud compute. So they're paying 3 ways, and they're getting not a lot out of it. And the only reason this has gone on is because a lot of companies that are in this, in the tech world have just constantly been able to raise more and more money. So they haven't really scrutinized their budgets. They haven't really scrutinized, what are these people working on all day? That's changed in the last year. And, more important than anything is consider yourself a consultant. And if you want to look up, at the most extreme example is the McKinsey or the Bain case studies that they ask for people when they go in for an interview. And these are, 2 big, consulting shops that hire a lot of, new grads out of top schools, and they all make them go through a case study. And it's a business question. And you constantly have to think about what am I actually driving here? How does my business make money? Or what is my if you don't work, if you work at a nonprofit or government or something, what is the goal? How do you either make money or achieve whatever policy? And how does what you do ladder up to that? And a lot of people can't do that, and they don't want to do that. And the people who don't want to do that and want to fight it, a lot of them are getting laid off. So I don't know, like learn a lesson, I guess. Like,
that's I think leads right into one thing that I've seen so much. There was this explosion of conversation, at least on LinkedIn, right? Which is not real life, but is,
Wait, I thought
Everyone on LinkedIn thinks
that's
it
where I
is.
spend most of my day. So I don't know. That's my life.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like mine too. But it's, there was this sudden explosion of conversation around, and it happened like when the layoffs started and things turned sour, like in the fall, of suddenly you need to be close to the business, right? And then everybody was using this term, close to the business. And I kept saying, like, I think I know what that means, because like you, Lauren, I come out of an era where like my first job in data was at a publicly traded utility in Wisconsin. So every single dollar that we spent had to be tied to a capital project, because that's how you make your rate case, right? You can't ask for a higher electricity rate unless you show you're making investments in physical plant, right? That's it. So everything I did had to be tied to, see, look, we're putting up this new wind farm, or we're switching this coal fire plant over to natural gas, or that sort of thing. It was just the way things were. And then, so everybody's talking about closer to the business, but I didn't see a lot of talk about, like, what does that actually mean, And if I was someone who had maybe gotten into data, like kind of in the middle or post, big data era, Hadoop era, I was questioning, like, would I even have the skills to do that? So if I'm someone out there who's in a job and I'm starting to worry, is that really, like, do I need to go and re-educate myself, or maybe educate myself for the first time on, like, how does this company actually make money, and how am I contributing to that process? Is that really how it starts?
yeah, absolutely. I think so. And like everything, like all of this data work at the end of the day is just basically accounting, but it's accounting in like not using non-GAAP accounting principles, and just counting stuff within departments. So if you're mostly working with marketing at a SaaS company, for example, you have probably Marketo or something. You probably got the Salesforce data. You can see how many leads came in, how many leads converted to whatever. If you built a little bit of an attribution model, this customer, 10% attributed here, 20% there. And you're going to get, analyses out of this that say, when we target this type of customers at this type of firm and go after this type of profile, we, our deal cycle is 50% better. We close deals in 3 months instead of 6 months, or whatever it is. That is interesting, but how does that actually make your company money, right? Like, you still have to go to a sales team. The sales team still has to close it. And what are your unit economics of your business? Like, software especially is supposed to be, infinitely scalable, or at least, converge to the point of the cost of electricity that's used to, power cloud computing. Theoretically infinitely scalable. And if you don't know, if you can't like you should know what your company's revenue is as of, I don't know, last month or yesterday or last week or whatever it is, like what your ARR is, or, if you, what your ARR is broken down by like your enterprise plans, or your top 10% of customers, your bottom 50% of customers, maybe they're on a PLG plan or something. Like, you should know how that kind of all works, and about like what an upsell is, and how the cycle, like, customers who are paying, I don't know, on the 20,000 a year plan, how do you get them to the 100K a year plan? You should know how this all fits together, and that should be part of like what you present in your analysis. And I would say that if you're not in a situation where like you brought this up and you've made it very clear, like what, that you want to be closer to the business, and you've talked with, the head of revenue or the CFO or someone who's in that core weekly business meeting, and you're not getting in there, then it might be time to find a new job. And a good litmus test for this is like pretty much every tech company I know, every e-commerce company as well, has the weekly business review, which is the CEO, the COO, the CFO, a couple other, heads of this or whatever of that. What they're going over is half the time they're arguing about numbers, and then the number informs a strategy. And I've seen so many times in my career that they're, looking up a bunch of dashboards that were made by some analyst. Behind that analyst is an analytics engineer. Behind that analytics engineer is a data engineer. And oh, look, there's also some like little machine learning recommendation engine that is cycling stuff, for customers to view, and get better recommendations. And there's like 4 data, 5 data, 6 data employees that are actually have made what the executives are arguing about, but none of them are in the room.
Yeah.
Like that's a load of baloney. Like, and like even the head of data, like, whether that's the VP of analytics or head of data engineer, whatever, like someone's got to be in that like meeting, because you should be the closest to the data because you are a data expert. And if you're not, then like, I don't really know what the point of the job is, to be honest with you. Like, you're just kind of moving data around, and the returns are very low, honestly.
I feel like part of the problem there too is falls back to, and you were talking earlier about like churning out dashboards, and dashboard spam is one of my greatest enemies. I sometimes tell people like a dashboard in a lot of ways is like a wall between you and who you're trying to communicate with. There are times to build a dashboard, but oftentimes I feel like organizations rely on them. The idea is like, oh, we're going to build this perfect dashboard that's going to have the metrics we need, and then we can just look at the dashboard and like we'll just make all decisions based off of the dashboard. And it never happens. The dashboard generates this unmanageable volume of follow-up questions, and you just need a better process for managing that whole thing. And so how should a company manage that? Like if you're on a data team and you're thinking to yourself, okay, we need to be more involved in these decisions. Like what does that look like? Does it look like the head data person is in the room helping to answer those questions, or what, how do you know when you have it?
I mean, to a certain degree, shouldn't it be coming top down? Like even the most competent data team with the best tooling can only have so much influence if the data-driven decisioning isn't happening above them, right? In my experience across a number of tech companies at this point, smaller ones, is that there's within data departments or beyond, there isn't much data-driven thinking. It's more like scramble to get the numbers for X board meeting, scramble to get the numbers kind of looking the way that you want them. And in the bigger picture, data-driven decision-making is not a reality.
Yeah, I think that like when you have it, I mean, you're just like chasing a car, right? And there's no perfect, like a dog chasing a car. There's never a perfect, outcome. But being invited into the room is definitely, and being that trusted expert, that trusted consultant is very much, how you advance your career. And that's how you go from, being an $80,000 a year analyst to being a $200,000 a year analyst, like, regardless of whatever the title is.
Are you saying make your voice heard?
Yeah, make your voice heard. And like, I don't know, I think a lot of companies, like to your point, Mary, like a lot of companies will say they're data driven and it's just like this soup of nonsense. And like, as an individual employee has to like decide, like, do I want to sit here and churn out dashboards, or am I going to go work somewhere else where I have a better, ability to move the needle, or like I'm, in the conversations and in the room. And, if you're not in your current situation, it might be time to move. And, I think like this is all like data, like the analyst job has become like an IT job. And that's where all the problems are in all of this. Like the whole analytics engineering thing Like I've just called that a pyramid scheme before. I'll follow up on that separately, but like if your job is just to make more tables or materialize views, and your job is just continuously to just churn out tables that go into a dashboard somewhere or a self-serve dashboard, like what are you doing all day long? Like you're just making tables. Like you're basically like a furniture manufacturer. Like, you know, like just making tables, And like and then the worst part is that like after you've made like thousands of tables that support, you know, some analysis somewhere, you know, maybe that analysis is never used again. So all the work you did is for moot. And like a lot of this stuff actually about data modeling, like Kimball on the cloud, Kimball in Snowflake, the star schema in Snowflake, like none of that really scales for the cloud. None of that like really works at all. Like it works functionally, yes. Like if you do it correctly, things will be correct. But it doesn't work in the fact that like it requires all these bodies to maintain all these tables along the way, and it's very hard to get that right. And I think that's something from, you know, an era when people had one source system, or like, you know, one source of where their customer data came from, one source of what the idea of an order or a transaction is. And that's just not true with a lot of these companies, especially like when companies go omni-channel or they start selling through multiple channels. Then you have orders that are sitting in 3 different, 4 different, 5 different systems. Then you've got the concept of a customer sitting in multiple systems. And I think that like this table explosion is where like it's been gamified. Like now, if you have too many tables, you can go by Datafold. What does Datafold do? Datafold helps you manage all the tables you've built. You can go by Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo helps you observe and monitor the 10,000 tables in there, or you know, like a bunch of these other observability companies. And if you look, a lot of these observability companies, like they're actually like they're just like taking like, you know, the SQL and just running these full table scans over your tables, you know, using your cloud computing costs to do so. And so this is why it's exponential at a lot of these companies. Like you might like Snowflake's net dollar retention is which I think is 158 as of their last print a couple weeks ago. It's been like 170, 160s. Like those are loan shark rates. Like like if you're getting a 60% like loan and you're paying 60% the next year versus what you did this year, like that's like not even like a legal credit card. Like I think they cap them at like 30% in the US or something. Like you're basically getting a loan from the mob to do more data. And it's because you've made so many tables. And like the whole game is just as long as you can convince people that making tables is good and they can put on their resume managed 5,000 DBT models. And,
yeah.
And like that, like that's a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. Like I managed a team of 6 people and 10,000 DBT models. Yes, you had 6 people because you had so many tables that you made, and it's like it's not real. It's just it's not real. And so like I've been very open about like the fact that like, you know, this stuff gets out of hand. I think like, you know, this whole table game has been proliferated more than anyone probably by DBT, because you know that's what their product, you know, helps you do. And now we're seeing that just turn into Hadoop in the same way that Hadoop, like, I don't know, 80% of Hadoop was totally unnecessary. I think Microsoft did a study like 4 years ago, and they found like, well, actually 80% of all Hadoop was completely unnecessary. And I think we're in the same situation now. Once you know, make a job that is a little bit divorced from the business and is more, you know, a layer back, this stuff can spiral out of control pretty quickly.
So, Lauren,
yeah.
you've been critiquing this stuff, Lauren. Not many people have. I'd be curious what Eric and Ryan think. Do you think that there's more openness, maybe than we saw even a few months ago or a week ago, to some of the critiques of the Lauren Ballack style critiques?
Yeah.
I wouldn't even call
Yeah.
it a critique. Description, I should say, because she's really just describing.
Yeah, well, as someone who I work for a university, a pretty large organization, and it's interesting because like a lot of these, I feel like there's some awareness, like if you're on LinkedIn and all this other stuff, but like I question how much of these, how long it's going to take for like all these critiques and like all this awareness of that, that the horror show of Night of a Thousand Tables like can't continue, right? That like how long is it going to take for that to like penetrate larger organizations? And I think the tail end of like the Night of a Thousand Tables before like the zombie horde of tables is finally conquered is probably immortal. I don't know. Like,
Yeah. Well, it brings up a question, Eric. So, Eric, like he said, he works at a university. I've worked with and for universities in the past, and sometimes I wonder if that is a place that is slow moving enough that like some of these fads can actually like completely live and die before you ever even pick them up. And like that might, and is that frustrating in the moment when you're on LinkedIn and you're seeing like, oh, there's these people called analytics engineers and it seems like a cool title and I think they get paid a lot. But then in reality, like they are riding this roller coaster that at the university, like you guys just don't get on, right?
Essentially, it's like, the Gorillion table creation. It's like, sometimes I feel like we're on the on-ramp of that, not like not on cruise, not on like cruise or the off-ramp. So like, if this change hits fast enough, like I think maybe we can dodge it.
Yeah.
But, we still have like a lot of like big models, classic source systems, data warehouse type stuff. I mean, with the introduction of Tableau taking off and all that, we definitely have a lot of table for Tableau, but like we're still using a lot of old enterprise systems that have like giant packages created for them, giant models created for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in general, though, there is like an openness to this critique. I think so Eric and I both went to the Data Day Texas conference in Austin at the end of January, which was really cool. And people were definitely in a different sort of mood there, right? Than maybe they had been in previous years. And
well, they all got laid off.
That was part of it. Yeah, it was definitely, there was an element of like a lot of people had just lost their jobs. And, but I think it has cracked open the door to an openness to this sort of critique. When money's flowing, it's really easy to just ignore the problems, right? Because like everybody's taking home a big paycheck and valuations are going up and up and up. And then suddenly it's like, it just feels like in the fall, there was this like record skip moment. And all of a sudden, it was like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, maybe some of these things were like a bad idea. Oh shit. And so, yeah, I see that. I sense it. I see people talking about it in a way that they weren't before. And in a time when, like, Lauren, when I first got to know you, it was when you were like throwing nuclear bombs on LinkedIn. And at that moment, it just seemed like you did feel like a voice of dissent during like the person at the party who runs in and is like, guys, there's a meteor outside. And everybody's like, shut up. We're having a good time,
Open bar.
Yeah, open bar. Like we don't want to hear about it. And now it's reached a point where like you can't ignore the meteor anymore. And so
that said, in the broader economy, I mean, we're talking this stuff because we're insiders. The analytics engineer title is still taking off very much. So
I don't know if it is. I don't know. I don't believe. I don't believe
BI
most
engineer.
of the stuff. I just don't believe most of the stuff I see in this marketing. And that's the other problem with this. Like, building off of what
in terms of job postings, it's growing.
Everything's an engineer now.
Yeah, but it's
That's
growing. It's right. And the reason it's growing is because it's so inefficient that you need to hire 2 or 3 of them instead of just hiring one person. No, I'm serious. Like, and like if you look at the history of this, like, when Sequoia and Altimeter came on, they're like, oh yeah, like part of the story was like, oh, look at all these analytics engineers. Like, look at all these jobs posting and how fast it's growing. And like, oh, let's throw some money into it. Well, yeah, that's because you're just throwing money. The reason there's so many job postings is because you're hiring 2 or 3 people to do, like, frankly, what one person could be doing, and making all these tables. And then you have these bloated data teams where you have like 10, 15, 20 people, and everyone's mostly focused around tables and the creation of more tables. So I like job, here's how the whole thing works, right? Like, when interest rates are low, like, companies have more budget to hire more people. More people are going to invest in like more frameworks, open source stuff, products that do less. When interest rates go up, you got to buy more products that just do the whole thing for you, and not, hire all these people to be glue that glues everything together, because you can't afford it. And like, the same thing happens in RevOps. The same thing happens in the Salesforce world, the marketing, Marketo, Salesforce, Pardot, whatever world. Like, it's the same exact thing over there too, frankly. And I don't know, it's very interesting, because a lot of these, like, I go to happy hours or meetups or whatever, and there's always, last 3 or 4 months, someone's always come up to me, sometimes several people at the same event, and will like shake my hand and like, oh, you're Lauren. And I'm like, oh, like, man, everything you said is, wow, like, it all came true. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it really kind of did. It really kind of did. We're almost at the top of the hour here. One thing I wanted to get to that I don't feel like we uncovered, and maybe you don't have time to really dive into it, but like, how did you two find yourselves to this place where you're like this voice of dissent, a really needed one at a time that, Lauren, you saw coming, a lot of people didn't, right? What's the story there? Like, how did you find yourself, both of you? How did you find yourselves in this seat?
You can go first, Lauren, on that.
I mean, I'm just, I'm going to say things that I believe are true. And even if that is, considered contrarian or whatever, controversial or whatever, I don't really care. I know it's true. I knew a year ago these companies are going to all run out of money and they're not going to get more money because the interest rates are going up. And then you can look at it in hindsight and say like, oh yeah, well, that's obvious now. Well, I don't know. Like, it's kind of obvious back then if you know how it all works. And so like, I don't know. I think that like, how did I arrive in the position? Well, like, I get paid a lot of money for consulting, to just, the customers pay me a lot of money to solve their problems for them. And they don't want to hear the same nonsense that they hear from everybody else. They want to hear like the truth, or something that sounds like the truth to them or makes sense to them. And in the same way that like, it's been this narrative the last couple of years of, you have to hire a big team, you have to use DBT, you got to use a cloud data warehouse, you got to get one BI tool like Looker for your managed stuff, and then another one like Mode for your ad hoc. And then and then you have to have data engineer, and here's what you title them, and here's what they are to be a staff analytics engineer, and blah, blah. And it's all like, if you look at who makes all this stuff up, it's the same like 3 venture capital firms that make it all. So, if I can call baloney on it, I'll call baloney on it, and, build my credibility.
And I come to the industry from the standpoint of working as a journalist for 15 years, who always tries to maintain a critical eye on anything that I'm involved with, and I've found that pivoting into working in data, working for a number of tech companies, and now I also have my own consulting firm doing data and SaaS marketing, that I kind of don't want to give up that journalist's outlook, which I think you share. You're not a journalist, Lauren, but you share of truth telling, and it's because that's what is good ethically, but it's also because that's what's good for business and innovation. Like, there's a lot of conversations happening that aren't happening publicly. Most of the conversations happening publicly are bullshit or content marketing or some mix of those two. And let's take some of the real conversations public. And that was really the starting point of our show, was let's talk about the stuff people aren't talking about. It's not necessarily spicy or scandalous. A lot of it is fun, but let's bring a different level of transparency. I think with the way the economy is going, with uncertainty, volatility, there's an appetite for that. People want real stuff. That's what we've seen in reactions to the show. So that's kind of how Tech Bros show was born.
Yeah. Well, that's that I think is a good place to leave it for today. So first of all, thank you so much for coming on. I thought this was an awesome hour, very enlightening, I'm sure, for I know it was for me, I'm sure for Eric and our audience too. Your show is great. So where can people find the Tech Bros show again?
They can find it on my LinkedIn page, Mary McCarthy. They can find it on YouTube and on Twitter. We live stream. So I'll put those links in the comment to the show every Friday. Check us out. And we'll have the brothers on one of these days.
All right.
Yeah, we'd be thrilled to join you. All right. So
I have another Simpsons clip to edit. I already have one.
Oh, that
picked
was
out in my
awesome, by
mind.
the way. Loved it. Yeah. It kind of put our production value to shame, because you guys have like, the intro, a video meme. Like, we struggled to throw up like one slide during the show.
I mean, this one does all the talking, so I've got to do something.
That's right. No, we've decided, if nothing else, we can bring the highest production value
quality,
to the deluge of data podcasts that have been started since everybody got laid off.
Love it.
So, all right. Well, thank you both for coming on. We will go ahead and wrap things up here. So let me just go ahead and do that. All right. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you again to Lauren and Mary. What an awesome hour that was. One last plug for today's sponsor. Eric, who's today's sponsor?
Well, it's us, the Super Data Brothers.
That's right, the Super Data Brothers. We can help you with your data and analytics needs. So go ahead and reach out. You can reach us here if you want to get a hold of us. One of these days there's going to be a website, but for now there's an email address. So go ahead and email me, Ryan at superdatabrothers.com. Any last words there, Eric, before we let the people go?
No. Here, let's let them watch the meme again.
Get out! Okay, but on my way, I'm gonna be doing this. If you get hit, it's your own fault.
Okay, then I'm gonna start kicking air like this. And if any part of you should feel that air, it's your own fault.
I better go check that out.
All right. That one's a classic. Okay, so until next week. Next week coming up, by the way, if you're watching this and you're going to be at the Gartner Conference, I will be at the Gartner Conference in Orlando. So let me know. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Say hi, so we can say hi to one another down there. And then next week's show will be all about unpacking what was discussed there. So until next week, I'm Ryan.
And I'm Eric.
And we are the Super Data Brothers. Take care, everybody. Bye.